All right, so tonight on State of Play on Mint Press News, welcome y'all. Ukraine invades Russia, masterstroke or strategic blunder. Which one is it? Spoiler alert, it's not looking like the best operation. So, and I do have to say, as a preface, I'm always kind of frustrated reporting on this topic and giving an analysis because I'm totally baffled when I get called a tanky, which to me is absolutely absurd. If you know, you know, because I don't spend a lot of time condemning governments adversarial to U.S. imperium, but you have an entire corporate media apparatus to do that and manufacture consent for wars that never needed to happen, you know, like this one. So just so you know, I'm wholeheartedly against authoritarianism, whether it's left wing or right wing, but our government's dirty work is underrepresented and reported in our media. So that's what I focus on. And that's what Mint Press in general focuses on as well. But regardless of your political leanings, the strategic military reality is the strategic military reality. And that's generally apolitical. I mean, there's different ways you can interpret a data set to give yourself confirmation bias when you're looking at like the salient in this part of Ukraine. Yeah. Oh, I get called a tanky all the time, which as a black flag person is kind of crazy to me. But anyways, yes, data sets are generally apolitical, but how you interpret them based off your own political leanings, it can lead to confirmation bias and bad assessments. We're going to try to not do that here. Because again, the strategic military reality is a strategic military reality. And what are we looking at? So that's the approach we're taking tonight. So as apolitically as possible, is this a masterstroke or a blunder? Well, I'll just say this. If you think that 2 to 3 understrength brigades with stretched supply lines can take and hold Russian ground into winter and the ceasefire negotiation season, well, I guess this might not be the editorial news show for you if you think that's what's going to happen. So this is going to be an expansive topic. We're going to look at initial mainstream coverage that started breaking last week because this operation began on the 6th. It didn't really start getting picked up until the 8th, and now we're 6 days into it on the 12th. And we're going to look at the progression of reporting by corporate media, then look at some strategic goals and what the strategic goals might be and are they achievable. What I mean by that, Ukrainian strategic goals in this regard. And we're going to then look at what some U.S. intelligence affiliated think tanks are pushing about this incursion. Like, what is the Atlantic Council saying about this? What's the Economist take? I mean, I'm not saying that the Economist is like linked to Western intelligence at all, but we're going to look at the Economist as well and some of their reporting. But first of all, before we get into it, and while everyone's still filtering into the live, we are an independent newsroom with no corporate sponsors. and we're demonetized on like everything, kicked off of GoFundMe. So we have to keep giving this annoying plug in order to keep doing what we're doing, which is Patreon. $5 a month if you want to support us. If you don't have that kind of scratch because it's 2024 and life's only going to get harder, just hit the like button and it sends the live further up in the algorithm. Thanks, y'all, so much. Okay, so here we go. First of all, this is going to be the first reporting that I found. This is going to be from CNN, August 8th, and we're going to look at this and compare it to what we're seeing on the ground.
What we've been seeing, perhaps for 2 days now, is one of the most significant incursions into Russia since the start of the war, and total silence from Ukraine on the record about whether their troops are genuinely behind it. In the past, we've seen Russian citizens volunteering to fight for Ukraine, making those short incursions into Russian territory. But this, if you believe the Russian narrative, is potentially the Ukrainian regular military striding 5 kilometers, 3 miles deep into Russian territory, possibly further. The target of much of the assault appears to be a town called Sudzha. Russia calling this a major provocation. That's the words of President Vladimir Putin, suggesting that the Ukrainians have been firing on residential areas, a bit rich after Moscow has been doing that in Ukraine for over 2 years. But he was...
Yeah, of course, they'd qualify that. Civilian targets have been struck, though, obviously. Yeah.
He was assured by his chief of staff that the advance had been halted. A very different picture, though, seen on social media videos, some suggesting, without what we can confirm ourselves, that even Russian servicemen were surrendering to Ukrainians, according to some Ukrainian accounts, showing damage inside the town of Sudzha and potentially a multi-pronged Ukrainian move inside of Russia. Why? Well, some analysts are pointing towards a gas terminal near Sudzha, which controls Russian gas that moves through Ukraine to Europe. Still,
that's definitely part of it. There's also in terms of important key civilian infrastructure, there's also a nuclear power plant in play, but this is very superficial supposition by CNN. Of course, it's only like 2 days into it, but we're going to really flesh this out.
Now, in the 3rd year of the war, that may now be under Ukrainian control. That may have been the objective. Kyiv often looking to get control or inflict damage or influence on Russian infrastructure. But it's also a rare moment of good headlines for Ukraine in a war where they've seen the Donbas front line find Russian forces moving forwards incrementally, deliberately.
And now they're being honest. This is kind of one of the main strategic goals of this operation. I mean, there's not a lot of tactical gains, and we'll talk about like different ways to conceptualize military operations on this, because there's like 3 levels of conceptualization. There's tactical, like boots on the ground, operational, the entire battle space, and then strategic, which is like the geopolitical objectives of military action. So strategically, one of their goals is a PR win, because guess what? They kind of need a big PR win right now. So CNN's not wrong when they say like this is finally a good headline. It is, objectively, to suit their goals.
But very steadily towards Ukrainian military hubs. It's been simply bad news for Kyiv for quite some time.
Okay, so that's the initial reporting. It doesn't really give anything to the audience beyond Ukrainians pushing back. Finally, some good headlines, and yeah, that's really the extent of it. Now, if we look at other media and how they're reporting it, and I'm focusing the beginning of this episode on this because it's really important to understand like how most people's view of this conflict is manufactured and maintained. We're going to look at some of the information Forbes was focusing on through a subsidiary channel. And it basically is just sticking to like what elite units were involved in the operation and no details beyond that. Again, I think it's important. We're going to look at it.
A column of armored vehicles rolling into southern Russia's Kursk Oblast on the 3rd day of Ukraine's surprise attack into Russia confirms the involvement of one of Ukraine's best equipped and fastest moving brigades, the 80th Air Assault Brigade. The Forbes media outlet reported this. It is noted that a video that circulated on social media depicts a T-64BV or T-80BV tank, a UR mine-clearing vehicles, an IMR-2 engineering vehicle plus BTR-80 and US-made Striker wheeled armored personnel carriers rolling past a busy Ukrainian mortar crew.
Okay, so this is really not information that you need. What is interesting is they do have Strikers, which are U.S. armored personnel carriers. I used to have to do a couple of operations in Strikers when I was in Ranger Regiment. They're pretty low maintenance. They don't need a lot of gas. They're fast. They're a good fighting vehicle. And yeah, they were using, it's clear that they're using their best equipment and best troops for this operation. And we don't know how many of those they actually have left. So they kind of may be expending like surplus equipment that they don't have.
All the vehicles are up-armored with anti-drone cages. Infantry crowd the top of the BTR-80. Forbes recalled that only the 80th Air Assault Brigade operates that mix of ex-Soviet and ex-American vehicles. Further confirmation is found in a separate video shot by a Russian drone depicting strikes on ex-German Marder-tracked fighting vehicles in Kursk Oblast. The 80th Air Assault Brigade, like its sister unit, the 82nd Air Assault Brigade, apparently operates Marders alongside its Strikers. The Marders are heavy, the Strikers are fast. They suit the Ukrainian Air Assault Force's preference for swift but powerful attacks.
And of course, this is why one of the units, this unit was chosen. This is not the most tactically important region. I mean, you do have the massive gas pipeline, which could be consequential, but I don't think they're going to turn it off and start using it to leverage diplomatic power with Europe. We're going to get into that. But yeah, I mean, this was kind of undefended because it wasn't the most important place. It was from a different front, and they got in there fast and quick before Russia could organize, at least at first. Now there's a pushback and there's some resistance happening now a few days later. It did take some time to mobilize, but this is why they chose to do a lightning raid in there, because can they hold ground with light infantry units? I'm not really seeing any tank units. We're not really seeing a lot of artillery go in there. So this is why people originally thought that this was a raid and not like an incursion where they're going to try to hold ground. But it looks like now they are.
According to Forbes, the participation of the 80th Air Assault Brigade, one of the better Ukrainian brigades, underscores the scale of the Ukrainian operation just north of Ukraine's northern border with Russia. Forbes says that in the 29 months since Russia widened its war on Ukraine, pro-Ukrainian fighters have launched many raids across the border into southern Russia.
Okay, so the footage we're seeing right now is reportedly, Russian soldiers being taken prisoner. I can't tell if it's a op or if it's real. I'm sure some prisoners were taken. It was a lightning raid. They were caught unawares, at least initially. So prisoners are going to happen. Anytime this happens, that's going to happen as well. So I can't vouch for the authenticity of these prisoner photos, but yeah. I just wanted to point that out there.
These raids have been small in scale and limited in scope and have never lasted more than a few days. More than anything, they've been meant to embarrass Russian leaders. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine believes that this offensive may force Moscow to transfer troops from the Donetsk region and slow down Russian successes in this direction. In order for this tactic to bring success to Kyiv, the Russians must transfer many troops from the Donetsk direction. If the Russians stop the Ukrainian offensive in Kursk without bringing in additional forces, the offensive in Kursk will lose its meaning.
All right, well, that's a pretty unsophisticated summation of the situation. Combat forces will be redeployed to deal with this. Russia cannot tolerate an attack on its sovereignty and ground being taken. And we'll get into that in a second. But just so I can lay it all out there for those who are just waking up from the weekend and realizing what the heck is going on in Europe. 6 days ago, all right, the Ukrainian Army, AFU, Armed Forces of Ukraine, initiated a surprise counteroffensive into the Russian region of Kursk along the northern border of Ukraine and initially captured over 350 square kilometers of territory in what is the largest regional gain since the Kharkiv offensive nearly 2 years ago. And since I'm going to be talking at y'all for a second, can we get some fun B-roll up to make sure the ADHD kids have something to do? So I probably have ADHD, by the way. This is the armed forces of Ukraine's first offensive into Russian soil and has apparently caught the Russian military unawares. However, the salient question, see what I did there? The salient question remains, what are the goals of this brazen offensive? And just by the way, this B-roll footage is all from like Ukrainian Telegram channels. So there's going to be some Azov propaganda as well. I mean, it's really hard for us to get the Russian stuff because there's a barrier to access it on YouTube and stuff. But anyways, it's mostly Ukrainian. So what are the goals of this brazen offensive? After 6 days of observation, it is becoming clear that the battle for Kursk could either end in a significant strategic victory, unlikely, that improves Kyiv's negotiating position in the stalled peace talks, or a grave blunder that diverts men and material away from the fighting against the steady Russian territorial gains to the south. The Donbas is, after all, more valuable than the Kursk region. Hint, hint, it's going to end up being a blunder, but the CIA talking points are hard at work. Anyways, the likely goals of the incursion are, one, you know what? I think I'm going to post this in the comments so, you know, you can copy paste it. This, hang on, one sec. Oh, YouTube rejected your comment. This usually means they think it's spam. I'm going to drop. Okay. Hey, Jim, I'm going to drop in the Telegram channel. Maybe you can find a way to post it. All right. So the likely goals of this incursion are to stall the Russian initiative and territorial gains it has made since the start of 2024. Okay. 2, to win a much needed public relations victory and focus on a more positive narrative for Ukraine in light of Russian victories. This will be important both for the demoralized population of Ukraine and the Western politicians who have become leery of funding a losing proxy war. 3, to capture and hold as much territory as is militarily viable in order to strengthen Ukraine's diplomatic leverage in the event of resumed peace talks or a negotiated settlement. 4, to improve its leverage with the European Union by capturing the Sudza gas metering station, which they have. It's been confirmed in pro-Russian Telegram channels that they have control of the settlement of Sudza. Or, sorry, my Slavic pronunciations are horrible, but it's spelled down there. Gas metering station that pumps nearly 50% of all Russian gas exports to the EU since the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline. It's possible that Ukraine may now threaten to turn the gas flow off in order to silence vocal critics of war, like Hungary, which has vetoed several aid packages in Brussels, the seat of the EU, to send military support to Ukraine. So they can threaten energy supplies. Europe's already in an energy crisis. This is kind of a power move. How long can they keep this political leverage over the EU going? Will they use it? Also, does Ukraine want to shut off the gas? Because Ukrainian government does, the $1 billion of transit fees, apparently, according to BNE and Telenews, gets pumped through the gas lines from Russia to Europe, and Ukraine gets that $1 billion in transit fees. So is that something they'll do? I don't know, but they are capturing key infrastructure. They're now, according to one source, hang on, I'm trying to get this updated. Not only are they going for this gas metering this gas metering station, a lot of people think that this maneuver has a lot of advantage. Of course, one is maintaining a stronger position before the upcoming negotiations. Also, the Ukrainians are drawing back some of the Russian forces from their territory, thus slowing down the Russian advance. Is this true? I haven't been able to see it. It doesn't really matter. They will get this contained, and the Russian incursion into the Donbas will continue along that axis of advance. So, okay. And the cherry on the cake, apparently, is the nuclear power plant in the city of Kurchatov, to which Ukrainians have less than 50 kilometers less to get there. If we manage, one guy was saying, if we manage to capture a nuclear power plant, it will be huge. Actually, yeah. The Russians have a Ukrainian power plant in their possession, but one of the issues was we have footage in Telegram channels, I don't have it right now, of Ukrainian drones flying at this Russian nuclear power plant. I'm not sure if they were trying to hit it. I can't imagine they're trying to start a second Chernobyl, but they may have been targeting military sites and air defense systems around the nuclear power plant. I'm not sure. I haven't seen any confirmation of what those Ukrainian drone strikes near the power plant were. So, first of all, I just got really distracted by a comment. What would you do if you're the head of Russian army, Ukrainian army? How would you prosecute this war? I would be using my position as a general staff officer to be pushing for a diplomatic solution, and then I'd probably get relieved of command by either government. So that's probably what would happen if I was a general officer in this conflict on either side. Because I have an intractable belief that this is a conflict that never needed to happen. But anyways, those are the 4 main strategic objectives that we can look at with this Kursk incursion. Main one is going to be negotiation and diplomatic leverage and PR, just a PR stunt. It's clear that Ukraine, already experiencing a military-wide manpower shortage, has committed significant resources and assets to the assault, including 2 of its best, as we saw before, equipped and fastest fighting brigades, the 22nd Mechanized Brigade and the 80th Air Assault Brigade. What at first looked like a typical lightning braid, as we were saying, meant to embarrass Russian military leaders, now appears to be a larger operation. So the AFU will try to hold this ground in order to shift Russian force dispositions away from the Donetsk region and go for a larger, much needed, as we've stated a couple times now, PR victory. So President Putin and Foreign Minister Lavrov have reiterated several times during the failed Swiss peace summit in June that Russia is open to a ceasefire deal, but Kyiv would have to take into account, quote, the realities on the ground, implying that Ukraine would have to cede territory controlled by the Russian military. By holding territory in Kursk, Kyiv hopes to flip the script, seeing that President Zelensky said last week on X that, quote, our unwavering goal is to prepare a real foundation for a just end to this war already this year. And it is possible. So it's very conceivable that they are trying to take ground in Kursk, take key civilian infrastructure, gas metering station, nuclear power plant, and use them as bargaining chips for upcoming ceasefire negotiations. The problem is they have to hold on to them for months. Is that possible? I mean, they're losing ground in Donbas, the Donetsk region, all along that axis, all along the salient. Can they hold ground here? I think it's kind of a gamble because they're moving their force dispositions to do a lightning raid into this region, hope to hold ground in the north, get the Russians to send up a force large enough to defeat or push back the Ukrainian force, thereby depriving the southern salient of needed resources to advance. The real question is, and I'm just going off open source information, is will the amount of forces being drawn up from Russia, from the Russian front, be composed mostly of combat troops, or are they going to send in reserve forces? It looks like it's a case of both. They're sending in both reserves and active combat units because there are different types of vehicles. Like we're seeing tanks without as much like of the turtle cover or the drone cages, which get put on over time. A lot of them are put on by the troops. So they may be newer vehicles or soldiers that haven't been to the front yet. So we're seeing a mix of both combat and reserve troops. So now, so it's clear, what I was trying to say and get to is that in order for this to work, and not just for it to be a hollow PR stunt, they need to hold the ground. Otherwise, it's going to undo their one good headline that they had recently, and then they're going to have lost a lot of troops trying to take ground that they couldn't hold, and they're going to get pushed back, and it's going to be even more embarrassing. So in the simplest non-military terms, those are kind of like the stakes we're dealing with. So like, if this is truly the main goal of the offensive into Russia, it does look like a massive long-term blunder, since there's little chance the AFU, the Armed Forces of Ukraine, can hold Russian ground in the autumn months with a manpower shortage and supply line shortages, and a loss of territorial gains will undermine any short-term PR victories. So we already know what Putin's response is when it comes to like the negotiations. So Zelensky said he hopes to end the war with an equitable arrangement, a just arrangement by the end of 2024. But today, Putin's saying this.
They're trying to improve their negotiating positions in the future. But what negotiations could we even talk about with people who are attacking civilian infrastructure, or trying to create threats or nuclear industry facilities? What is there to even talk about with them of the Ukrainians? They're trying to improve their negotiating positions in the future. But what negotiations could we even talk about with people who are attacking civilian infrastructure, or trying to create threats or nuclear industry facilities?
Wait, am I going crazy, or did like that Dawn News clip just repeat the same exact thing, or is Putin repeating himself? I don't know. But yes, I think you have a public position from the head of state of Russia that they're not going to allow this, at least for the moment, to improve Ukraine's negotiating position. So I don't think I played it twice, man, unless I downloaded it twice. Okay. I'm really bad at technology, so I'm sorry if I played it twice. Now, is this even viable? I mean, that's the real thing. So we've looked at how the media is reporting it. Now, I wanted to get into what the MIMAC, the military, industrial, media, and academic complex in America, is making about this. We've watched the media reports. They're kind of making it seem like this daring lightning raid that's strategically and operationally viable. It's going to like be a game changer. Ukraine now has like a negotiating lever for upcoming settlement talks. So that's the media. But now let's look at what some of these U.S. intelligence affiliated think tanks are saying, because they also are part of the manufacturing consent for the military industrial complex and interventionism around the globe. So going to really quick pull up the Atlantic Council. They're like, I'm not sure which one is worse. You can say in the comments section what you think. Is it the Rand Corporation or is it Atlantic Council? I'm not even sure. Okay, so here, can we make that bigger and me smaller? All right, so Ukraine, this came out yesterday. Ukraine's invasion of Russia is erasing Vladimir Putin's last red line. So basically, there's been this big narrative in the media. Also, I don't have time to play everything, that Russia's desperately trying to play down how big of a game changer this operation is. And, they're trying to control all the panic within the Russian military. From my perspective, that's completely absurd. It's a raid with like 2 brigades, a few thousand men. Okay, they're probably going to get pushed back. So because they're getting pushed back everywhere else, it stands to reason. Like, you don't need to be the biggest like strategician to think that that's a very likely outcome. Peter Dickinson, yeah, he's on the. We're looking at the Eurasia Center. And the Eurasia Center's mission is to enhance transatlantic cooperation and promoting stability, democratic values, and prosperity in Eurasia, from Eastern Europe and Turkey to the West, Russia, Central Asia, and the East. So Eurasia Center, oh boy. All right. So Ukraine's summer offensive is a watershed moment in the current war and a historic milestone in its own right. For the first time since World War II, see, they're framing this in a big tradition of resistance movements. For the first time since World War II, Russia has been invaded by a foreign army. Initial reports indicate that this ambitious operation, hey, I'm not going to lie, it's friggin' ambitious, but it might be a little bit too ambitious, was prepared amid great secrecy over a period of months. Based off of what Western leaders are saying, it wasn't prepared in that much secrecy. It has NATO's fingerprints all over it. So this was definitely not a rogue operation. Ukraine managed to catch the Russians completely off guard, with Ukrainian forces advancing tens of kilometers. Okay. Now, I think we're just going to skip to the manufactured consent. Here we go. Ever since the Russian invasion of Ukraine began in February 2022, the international response has been hindered by fear of escalation. Western leaders have allowed themselves to be intimidated by Putin, who has used thinly veiled nuclear threats and frequent talk of Russian red lines to restrict the flow of military aid and convince Ukraine's partners to impose absurd restrictions on the use of Western weapons inside Russia. I mean, there's really not been that many restrictions, dude. We're giving them F-16s, we're giving them HIMARS, we're giving ATACMS ballistic missiles. Like, what restrictions? We're not giving them nukes, but everything else. I think they're really concerned about like how the 60-day period where the Ukrainian aid package didn't pass Congress because they attached it to aid for Israel in the Gaza war, and it was just too complicated of a bill. And so this is kind of what they're trying to prevent in the future. Because look, all these the politicians read think tank articles, because no one can be a subject matter expert on every contingency, every conflict, every area that is in the world that they have to make policy decisions on. So Atlantic Council is one of the publications that politicians, lobbyists, political operatives read. And this is the academic portion of the manufacturing consent. So this is why we're kind of going through what the Atlantic Council is putting out about this. Ukraine's offensive, and you'll see how didactic it gets. It's like an instruction manual for politicians. Ukraine's offensive is now posing serious question about the credibility of Russia's saber rattling and the rationality behind the West's abundance of caution. So they're saying, hey, don't be cautious anymore. After all, the Ukrainian army's current invasion of Russia is surely the reddest of all red lines. If Russia was at all serious about a possible nuclear escalation, I don't think they are, mutually assured destruction. This would be the moment to make good on its many threats. In fact, Putin has responded by seeking to downplay the invasion while pretending that everything is still going according to plan. I don't think he's pretending that everything's going according to plan. I've gone through transcripts. I haven't seen anything about that. I do think the entire establishment is downplaying the operation because based off the scope of it, it doesn't look like it's a big sensation. It just seems like an incursion that's not built to last. So in his first statement following the start of Ukraine's invasion, Putin euphemistically referred to it as a large-scale provocation. Yeah, I mean, it's not the most powerful political stance. Putin saying, condemning people for invading another country in light of the main global perceptions of what's happening in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, but it is a big escalation in what the Ukrainian military is doing. So a phrase that seems specially tailored to disguise the gravity of the situation. The Kremlin then declared a state of emergency in Kursk Oblast, which was subsequently upgraded to a counter-terrorism operation. Okay, so Russian propagandists adopted an equally low-key approach. There have been no appeals to the Russian people or attempts to rally the country against the invader. On the contrary, the Kremlin media has reportedly received instructions to avoid stirring up the situation. I mean, yeah, while Russian officials have been told to refrain from commenting on developments in the Kursk region altogether. These are most definitely not the actions of a self-confident military superpower on the verge of major escalation. So what they're saying in this article is Russia's not going to escalate. We need to stop being scared of Russia escalating, and we need to just escalate ourselves right now. And so that's what is being consumed by some people in the political class right now. I just wanted to point out the think tank world for y'all real quick. And oh yeah, there will be a Q&A at the end of the show. Okay, cool. Just checking the comment sections real quick. All right. Anyways, that is we've looked at the media and the academic aspects of all the talk and propaganda surrounding this military operation. Now, there's one thing to also consider, and that is the economic aspects of what's happening right now. So Russia has defied expectations at every corner. Regardless of how you feel about that government, the Western sanctions against Russia didn't work. They've started thriving. In spite of it, their military capacity is even impressing some U.S. generals and people within the defense industrial complex. And even to the point where you've got General Mick Ryan, who is now a senior fellow for military studies at the Lowy Institute, like commenting on the operation, saying that the Russians will have to respond, even they do not have a bottomless pit of resources to do so. So they're changing their talking points, kind of. They're saying even they don't have a bottomless pit of resources. They could have said they don't have a bottomless pit of resources, but the fact that you would accidentally or intentionally add even means that even key figures that are within the policy apparatus are recognizing that, they don't have a bottomless pit of resources, but they've got a ton of resources. And then you have think tanks like the Rand Corporation and the Atlantic Council trying to manufacture consent among American politicians to be like, more aid, they need more aid. Yeah, they are going to need more aid. This is going to be a bottomless pit of aid because what's happened to the Russian economy. Now, if we look at a news article from today from a publication like The Economist, which also is in the media and I would say academic also bracket of manufacturing consent, they are starting to change their tune a little bit just to basically preserve their journalistic integrity. So they've really changed their tune on how they report about Russia's economic status. So Vladimir, this is from yesterday evening. Vladimir Putin spends big and sends Russia's economy soaring. Okay, that's true. And then, of course, it has to ask, how long can the party last? Well, apparently the ruble was supposed to collapse in 2002, so it might last a little longer. I mean, according to The Economist. So, this year, Russian GDP is expected to rise. And this is from an adversarial economic publication. This year, Russian GDP is expected to rise by over 3% in real terms, faster than 95% of rich countries. Yeah, I think the World Bank just classified Russia for the first time as a high-income country. In May and June, economic activity significantly increased, according to the central bank. Other real-time measures of activity, including Goldman Sachs, suggested the economy is accelerating. Unemployment is close to an all-time low. The ruble is doing fine. True, inflation is too high. In June, prices rose by 8.6%. I mean, it is a wartime economy, well above the central bank's target of 4%. But with cash incomes growing by 14%, that's almost twice as much as inflation year on year. The purchasing power of Russians is rising fast. So it's controllable inflation, unlike what we've got in the United States, right? In contrast with almost everyone else, Russians are feeling good about the economy. So, if populations are feeling good about the economy, their prospects, they're not going to be as, yes, sure, some of their sons and daughters are dying in the war, but the general population isn't going to be as critical of the government or as critical of the war that they're fighting. So the internal dissent within Russia, the factions who wanted to that supposedly existed that wanted to overthrow Putin, and I have a number of Russian friends who, I cultivated like India, who definitely don't like Putin, and they are a part of the population. They were never going to rise up and revolt. All these internal pressures that people were saying were going to manifest in Russia because it was on the brink of collapse, they're just not going to happen now. They're not going to happen. And so when you look at something that is happening like this conflict, this war in Ukraine, and you look at the devastation to the Ukrainian economy, the rampant corruption, which isn't just a Russian talking point. It's a real thing, just like in a lot of Eastern Bloc countries, and just like in, what are we talking about? In our country too. They just take black bag money. They don't know how to put it into a nonprofit, or they don't put it into a nonprofit like Hillary Clinton does. But if you see the disparity, military surplus, almost bottomless resources, according to one former U.S. general, a booming economy, and then you have war-torn Ukraine with a population really demoralized, needing this assault to happen to justify continuing it. And I'm not saying that a lot of Ukrainians don't continue support the war. I mean, they do. You just look at the Telegram channels and you look at the YouTube channels and with all the comments there's a huge portion of the population that does support the ongoing military action and doesn't want to negotiate with Russia. But there is this disparity in quality of life that's going to come into the strategic picture as this goes forward. And I'm not sure how they can kind of square that. We're just going to keep throwing money at this endlessly, and it's not going to stop, because one of the big problems is the West collectively. I'm amazed. What I mean by the West is America and its European vassals, because Europe's failing. It's like melting and evaporating in front of our eyes. One of the things we can't at this point be seen to do is look weak. This is like the final weakness, withdrawing from Afghanistan, now a failing in a proxy war in Ukraine. They can't. The war hawks in Washington will never give this up. So when people talk about a frozen conflict, that is an option. That's an absolute option. And then China is strengthening alliances with Russia. That's their worst nightmare. And Europe has become so pathetic. And the one thing about Donald Trump is he says he wants to defund NATO. I'm not sure if he ever will. I think it's just a talking point for his anti-globalist base, but we'll see. We'll see. I think, let's do an expanded comments section and focus on military stuff. So here we go. So many Ukrainians in the Netherlands, mostly fighting age men and their hot bimbo girlfriends living in a middle-class life. Also lots of sneaky wolf's angel and black sun tattoos on the boys. Well, there are last figures I heard that there were 600,000 Ukrainian military-age males living in diaspora because they don't want to fight. And we are seeing videos, and we have been for months, of black van goon squads going and wrapping up military-age males on the street for military conscription in the Ukrainian army. Where in the Russian army, you see the Russian Defense Ministry raising salaries and incentives for soldiers to join, raising benefits. And so there's a complete disparity in between the health of one recruiting system and the dysfunction of another recruiting system. And so they have been trying to put in legislation to extradite. I'm not sure if extradite's the correct term, but get these people's visa revoked so they have to return back to Ukraine so they can be enlisted to fight. Did Russia destroy the nuke plant? I heard it was on fire. The nuke plant is not destroyed as of right now. Some drones got pretty close to hitting it, and they may have hit some outlying buildings. If you want to follow a pretty reliable Russian Telegram channel, I would suggest Rybar in English. So Rybar in English. Okay, posting it right there. There's footage on there of the actual Ukrainian facility. Because it's on Telegram and I didn't pre-download it, I can't show you guys. It looks contained, and it doesn't look like we're going to have a Chernobyl yet, unless someone starts shooting howitzers into the cooling apparatus of the nuclear facility. So, news Okay, yeah. News just a PR victory for the Western media. Yeah, and they're going to keep making the most out of this thing for a while. So I don't think that's going to stop anytime soon. Let's see. How is the economy soaring? Oh, okay. Well, you know what? We're just going off reporting and statistics. But the thing is, the sanctions haven't worked. They've worked on their industrial base, and they've started cultivating trading relationships with other countries in the global south. And yeah, they're no longer as reliant on the West. And this is one of the main consequences of the war in Ukraine, is that it's leading a lot of these countries, these that are seen as traditional adversaries to the United States, to start making moves to break free of the dollar, the economic vice that the United States and neoliberal institutions like the IMF and World Bank have on other countries around the globe. So getting off the dollar, it's going to take a freaking long time, and it's a huge inconvenience. But now the question is, because like 1/3 of the world is under U.S. sanctions, does the threat of sanctions outweigh the inconvenience of getting off the dollar? And in order to get off the dollar, all these BRICS countries, and for other reasons too, are coming together, like the war in Ukraine, the ongoing belligerence in the Middle East, the unconditional support of Israel, the sanctioning in Venezuela, is kind of making everybody realize that U.S. control is loosening. We no longer have the power projection that we had in the 90s. And it's becoming clear that the inconvenience of getting off the dollar is less than the pain of the threat of sanctions. So don't worry, Greg. I'll make sure they play Toby Keith at your funeral. That's not what's going to be played at my funeral. I hate that guy. I know this is off topic, but I don't listen to pro-cop country. All right. Fascist country is not my thing. I grew up in Texas around a bunch of rednecks, and I never knew like a bunch of good old freaking country boys and law enforcement in the same place ever leading to anything good or reacting well. But I think after 9/11, all these freaking like cocaine cowboy country, anti-fascist, anti-war country artists started getting real fash and real pro-cop and pro-war. And 9/11 was the worst thing that ever happened to the country. So please don't play Toby Keith. I'll do like Ray Wiley Hubbard or something. Okay. Anyways, this war is 100% coming. America and its vassals lost the economic war against BRICS. I mean, there's still a lot of impetus and momentum behind the United States economic machine. The United States is not going to disappear as a power anytime soon. But yeah, it's definitely losing momentum. All the U.S. has is a big stick. They're rearing it to use to perpetuate their world hegemony. We're effed. Okay, first of all, yes. The thing is, the U.S. military machine still has a lot of juice, and we still have a lot of hard power. It's not what it used to be. And you can see like the cracks beginning to form. When we talk about U.S. hegemony, I, as an ex-military person, just like look at the massive recruiting crisis that the United States military is having, because Gen Z watched us millennials go to war for 20 years over some BS with horrible PTSD, suicide rates. They see the VA hospitals falling down. The U.S. military is not at the same readiness it was before the unfortunately titled Global War on Terror, which were, for the most part, low-intensity counterinsurgency operations that shifted our defense industrial apparatus away from like producing mass amounts of like tanks and artillery and shells that you need to fight a high intensity third generation warfare into all these like fancy next gen equipment contracts like the F-35 fighter. Whereas you have like Chinese, military industrial complex coming up with like some pretty close near tier stuff for like way less money, and way less money's been being taken out of the private sector to fund these things. So you got this recruiting crisis. You have this massively problematic defense industrial complex that's been getting worse over the 20 years it's been exploited during the global war on terror. And it's not only recruiting, it's retention. People are seeing what's going on in like Gaza and seeing U.S. foreign policy, and they're starting to question U.S. foreign policy as a whole. And so what you're going to see is not just a drop in recruiting, but also in what's called retention. So when you're in the military, you have contracts. For like most enlisted people and non-commissioned officers, you have contracts. So like it depends on what your job is, but you sign up for 5 years, and then once that 5 years is over, you sign up for another 5 years, and you do another 5 years. You keep signing contracts, and that's called retention. And there's certain things that will, make you want to like join. Like you get certain bonuses, like in terms of money. You get certain bonuses in terms of you get to go to like certain schools and training centers that you want to go to. There's a lot of perks, and we're starting to actually see the Russian military, in terms of retention, start to upgrade their benefits. So one of the big problems with the Russian army has always been like, you don't get paid much, and they kind of kick you out on your ass once you get out. But since this war started, they're kind of restructuring their whole apparatus. So anyways, that's a whole different topic. But yes, you're going to also see retention. So these guys are not going to re-enlist. You're going to lose guys and gals and non-binary pals with like 5, 10, 15 years experience. They're not going to re-enlist. You're going to lose all this skill. And it's not just recruitment. It's also retention. So can't fight wars if nobody wants to fight them, unless you want to try to institute the draft. And that ain't going to fly, partner. So okay, wait. If you think Russian economy is doing great, then you're not following economist YouTube channel Joe Blogs. 3 days ago, he published Russian economic catastrophe, overheating, and shortages. I mean, I'm not going to focus too much on that, but they've been saying the same thing since 2002. I just got the Economist up to show that this is what a lot of Western outlets have been posting since the beginning. So the Russian will struggle to cope with a sinking ruble. The same magazine that says the economy is super hot right now has consistently, since the war in Ukraine started, been posting stuff like that. What does the currency's collapse mean for Vladimir Putin's ability to wage war? Well, look at that. April 14th, 2003. This is something that you have to look at. Is this continuing to manufacture consent to in order to lead people to thinking like, oh yeah, we should keep supporting the war. It's almost going to collapse. It's almost going to collapse. But what we see proven since this thing started was that they always put out these pieces. People generally trust magazines about economics that are called The Economist, but they've just been wrong. They've just been completely wrong. So that's the only real point I wanted to make about that. Yes. All right. How will the Russians respond? Well, they're already responding. They're gathering forces, and they are actively engaging the Ukrainian troops that have come over the border. Lives have been lost on both sides. Russians have better supply lines. They don't have the same manpower shortage. Literally nothing makes it seem like the Ukrainians are going to hold out. And they don't need to make a huge deal out of this because they have the strategic upper hand. They have the whole home field advantage. They don't have the same manpower shortage. Their supply lines are shorter. And yeah, they just have more men. Sometimes it just really just comes down to numbers. So yeah. Well, I think that kind of is wrapping it up. I did want to just go over one more time since to just really drive home what, and as we wrap up, maybe there'll be some more questions, but really just to wrap up what the point of this operation is and why it doesn't seem like it's going to be successful. It's again to stall Russian initiative and territorial gains it has made since 2024. This may happen briefly, but there's no reason to believe that those gains, once this situation is controlled in Kursk, why they wouldn't continue. Two, to win a much needed PR victory. This kind of PR victory reminds me of the Israeli PR victory when they rescued 4 hostages. And they're like, look, we rescued these hostages. We're going to get all our hostages back now. And it was a PR victory until people started to realize, oh crap, all the hostages are going down below the tunnels now, and we're not going to be able to get them out again. So yeah, they did this operation. It scored some points in the media, but was it conducive to their operational and strategic goals? I don't know. I'm getting Gaza hostage rescue operation vibes from this one. I don't see the cost benefit analysis working out for them right now. So to capture and hold as much territory, third, as militarily viable in order to strengthen Ukraine's diplomatic leverage. Doesn't seem like the Russian foreign ministry is going to respond too well. Putin, we've seen a clip of him saying that they will not negotiate. They're not going to just let this ground get taken. They're going to do everything they can to take it back. And how is the Ukrainian army supposed to hold on with 3 brigades? We'll see what happens, but they don't have enough time to like entrench, create like massive defense in depth before the Russian army is pushing up against it, because they're already in contact right now as we speak. And to improve its leverage in the EU, don't think that's going to happen either. So yeah, I'd say I'm going to risk my reputation and say that this is going to eventually be seen to be a blunder in the coming days. The mainstream media is going to hold on to this for a couple cycles. The fighting is going to continue for some time, and it's going to end up being a big old nothing burger. It might actually get an aid package through, because I think it's very likely you're going to start seeing diplomatic language within the U.S. government saying things like, we need more aid packages so Ukraine can solidify their holding in the Kursk region. So that's something we should definitely look out for. And beyond that, I don't really see like anything else. Anything else you guys want me to cover? Let's see. Okay. 1 hostage killed today. 2 injured. Okay. Bourgeois economists are unreliable. Yeah, why is that? It's mostly, I'm not a Marxist-Leninist, but yeah, it's mostly because they want to maintain and conserve their position. And so, they suit their own interests and they own the newspapers, and that's why they're completely unreliable. And, who would want to fight for Harris and Biden? Just to round this one off, probably not. A lot of the military these days is mostly conservative. I was a self-described liberal when I joined the military, but of course, liberals, as we now all know, are just as prone to hawkishness as warmongering as every conservative. But I don't think a lot of good old white supremacist country boys are going to want to serve under a Harris and Walz administration. The U.S. empire is in decline more rapidly than I thought. I think like it may even be done being an empire by the end of our lifetimes, like another 50 years. I don't think I'm going to make it 50 years. I've had a lot of hard years, lot of city miles in my early 20s. I think that took off a disproportionate amount of years. But you guys might see it. The question is whether or not we will survive as an empire, because the thing about empires, all empires fall, but will we survive as a polity, as a group of people? And that remains to be seen. So thanks, y'all, so much for coming on. Let me know what you think about the extended Q&A section. I just kind of wanted to address some of these questions that were coming out about the Russia-Ukraine debacle, we'll just say. And I hope to see y'all next time. We're going to be doing Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, just like every other week. See y'all in the next one. And just keep on keeping on. It's 2024. It's going to get worse before it gets worse.